we're now connected and streaming.
Like you're really choppy, and you're turning into a robot on my end.
Well, that is not good. You're not a robot on my end, so that is some sort of thing.
Looks like it's catching up, maybe.
Yeah, we'll give it a minute. Got to give it a minute for people to join anyway, so hopefully the computers will figure out what they want to do. Waiting to see what the bit rate's going to look like now since
Yeah.
I restarted the modem again. We shall see. We shall see.
Looks
so
good
how are you
and
doing?
Sounds
though?
good on Twitch. I'm all right.
Yeah,
No
so far it's
overtime
okay
today.
for me. You haven't frozen again.
It's a fairly easy day at work today.
One thing I've noticed is I am kind of blurry.
A little bit.
Now, I did turn my light down, but that doesn't seem to be doing much. No, it's not really doing much. If anything, it's making it worse, which is why I turned it down in the first place. I can turn them way up. Or not. So many lights to play with. Well, we've got a minute. I can take a look at my webcam stuff.
Yeah.
Software.
Zoom thing.
Could be that too.
Not a Zoom thing. Not a Zoom the program, but a Zoom on your camera.
Now, it's not zoomed in. I could do focus.
Yeah, that.
Yeah, no. Adjusting autofocus never seems to help anything.
Yeah, I never use
Ever.
autofocus.
It's always, well, no, like, I don't mean autofocus, but adjusting the focus, like, never seems to help anything. Yeah. It's always like all the way to the left or nothing. Like, oh, let me touch it. Nope, it's all to shit. I hate this software that they released for this Logitech web camera. It is. They released new software. I can't use the old software, which the old software wasn't great, but this new software is garbage. I can add a watermark to my video if I want to. Yay.
I don't even use... I think I still use the old software through Skype. This must be like a primetime streaming thing for Twitch, because Twitch just keeps like going down on me. Must be a lot of
We've
people.
actually got really good bitrate right now for once. Speaking of which, hello everybody.
Hello, people.
How's it going? We're just chatting, waiting for a few minutes to give people a chance to hop on while I play with my webcam, because reasons. I can add a 3, 2, 1 countdown. Oh, that's a thing. Don't know why I would want to do that within my webcam software, but I could.
Yeah.
I just changed the resolution to full HD and that did nothing, so I don't know what that does. It wasn't at full HD, but then I looked at myself and I'm like, I'm not any different, so. Maybe it's because Zoom's using my webcam right now. Though, if I change things in here, it does change my webcam because I have a profile for a darker profile. And as you can see,
Yeah,
changes everything. Change that back. We don't need to be in vampire mode. So yeah, that's all I got. I don't know. I can just adjust my exposure, but auto white balance. I really shouldn't play with that because I already had it set where I wanted it. Maybe I should try using the chroma key in the software. Maybe that'll be a thing. I did change one thing. I decided to try to use Zoom's chroma key instead of my own because I didn't want to set up all my lights and turn them on, and so I wanted to see how that worked. But
I could see it.
Yeah, it's mostly up here though. It's not.
Yeah.
This. It's not too bad though. It's just seems a little blurrier than usual. Because I looked at it before I did it. I sat there and was like turning it on and off, like, okay, that's not doing anything to my face. So, anywho, it's about 12 after now, so I guess we'll go ahead and do the thing.
Let's do the thing.
It is time. So we will. Hey, Malice, because you hate yourself, yeah. We're gonna pull up our video, and we'll be right back to actually start talking about stuff. So, BRB. Hello, everybody. We are live with episode 18 of Masks and Mimicry after our amazing and awesomely short intro. I hate things that have long intro videos, so... we're here tonight to talk about breaking rules. Specifically, breaking rules for better roleplay in tabletop games. And I guess better play in general.
Yeah.
As always, I have Brand with me tonight.
Hello.
One of these days, we'll actually pull on guests again. We haven't done that in a bit, mostly because I'm lazy. And I'm lazy. So, let's see. Are we lagging? Our bit rate is good for once. So, I guess it's Twitch. Yeah, I don't know. Our bit rate and everything has been notoriously bad in the past, but it's actually working out fine this time. So I'm looking at it like, is it going to tank suddenly? Because it tends to want to do that. But
I'm seeing what he's seeing, I think. Twitch
we shall push
just keeps going down.
And go forward into talking about rule breaking in tabletop games, intentional rule breaking. When talking more specifically about times when it's a good time to think outside the rules, bend the rules a little bit. So, I want to start with a question, as I often do for us as well as for anyone in chat. What are some times that your storyteller broke or bent or acted outside of the specific rules of the game to make it more fun for you?
Oh, well, perfect, more recent explanation as well. Wild Magic. This past week, in fact, in your campaign, you had me roll on the Wild Magic table out of nowhere, avoiding the prerequisite roll to see if you even roll on the Wild Magic table. There's a 5% chance that you actually get to, and you just kind of ignored it and allowed a Wild Magic surge to happen, essentially, and it's always fun.
Yeah, I think it's well, I would say I would caveat that with one thing, and that is I know that you want the wild magic to occur. Some players may not be as open to having it happen, and so I know that you're very open to having the wild magic occur, and so I was like, this is a good dramatic moment, because I do think that's the thing. Like, I'm happy with having it be a roll on the table most of the time, And I don't necessarily want it to happen every time there's a dramatic moment, but it was kind of a dramatic moment, and it was one in which there wasn't an immense degree of risk to the party already. Like, y'all were not gonna die in this encounter, but it was still kind of dramatic. And so I was like, okay, if I drop wild magic here, first of all, I usually forget to do it altogether, and then I feel bad about it. So I
Right.
was like, I need to. I had it on. I have it written down on my DM screen. It's like wild magic, and I still forget. But I was like, if I throw it out here and something crazy happens, they're still not gonna die.
At least not by the NPCs.
Yeah, but it'll be, it'll help ramp up the drama of the moment a little bit. If
Yeah.
something cool happens, and instead you got one of the few good results.
Right.
It was like, oh
I'll
well,
take it.
okay, cool.
I'll take it. But
Hey, Indy.
even then, on that note, there is a place in our setting and where you decided it makes narrative sense for you to just, or for me to just completely ignore that initial 5% roll, and pretty much on cue, if I'm casting spells in the Mournland, things be crazy, yo.
Yeah, because we're playing Eberron, and the Mournland is supposed to be a place where magic is kind of jacked up to some degree. There's living spells roaming the lands and everything, and so in that case, it felt appropriate to be like, no, wild magic's going to be like every other spell you cast. That plus you were
Yeah.
like level 2 at the time, so you're not casting a lot of spells anymore, really. But for me, I've got a couple. In your game recently, allowing my character to learn another language through study. I mean, that's not something that's prohibited by the rules, but it's not something that's really ever. It's not an optional rule or anything in D&D.
Right.
It's not listed as something that, hey, you can have your players practice and work on things to learn them. But it is something that we kind of do in our games because it makes sense. Like,
Right.
if you pick up the flute and you start playing it regularly in the game, you're
You will be
probably going
better
to
at it.
become proficient with the flute. Another one, an older example, was Werewolf. The crap, what was it called? I forget
When
the.
I did
I forget the New World of Darkness one.
the Forsaken.
The Forsaken, yeah, that one.
Yeah.
I know Werewolf the
We don't talk about
Apocalypse, but
that.
I was like, Werewolf the Forsaken, yes. Uh, adding methods for us to deal with spirits, in large part because we had lost a player. And our
Yeah.
player that we lost was the main one that was supposed to be really kind of helping us deal with spirits. And so that really kind of screwed some things up because we were just sitting there like, oh no, we're dealing all those spirits, and none of us have really much that can help with this.
Yeah.
So tweaking and kind of changing some things to make it so we'd have some capability of dealing with the stuff in the game. And now somehow I'm taller than you. Oh, you're still hunched over. Okay. I was like,
Yeah.
how am I
I'm slouching a bit.
I moved you specifically. All right. So, with some of those examples kind of out and everything, I did want to just kind of, where are all the rewards? Oh. I turned those off because we're doing a podcast. I'm sorry. Just so people won't ask me to put on hats and stuff in the middle of the podcast. I was confused for a minute. I was like, what rewards? The first thing I kind of, actually, before I go into that, I wanted to ask what areas do you think are open in tabletop games for rule bending?
Ability checks for depending on the system you're playing, and how a player might describe they want to do a thing that is a little more complex than is governed by a simple label of a check. Like an acrobatics check could talk about a whole bunch of stuff, but they might want to do something fairly involved that maybe falls under a few different things, and you start bending rules to decide how to rule that might happen or to give some extra flair to it. We've talked before about like combat in general, bending rules for, I would count like flubbing dice as kind of bending rules on the DM's part. To not kill your players, things like that. Not that it's a good thing to do, but it's an area where it happens, I think, more frequently. And then narratively as well, just the way a DM describes his or her world and has the complete freedom to change things on a whim, depending on what it is, maybe tell your players, but it's their world, so they can treat things as they want to and go against the book information.
Unfortunately, my squid head is about 5 feet from me right now. And I'm surrounded by green screen. Otherwise, would be doable. I would say there are some character creation, character development, like with the skill, gaining new skills. As you mentioned, kind of the DM's storytelling, the DM's narration. And I think that can come up in a couple of ways that we'll get into.
Sure.
So let's start with one of the ways that I think this comes up the most often and is probably the least controversial, and that is, for the most part anyway, in general, and that is the rule of cool, which for me mostly encapsulates bending or breaking rules in action, like when things are happening in the game, when you're in combat or other things are happening, and someone's like, "I want to do X," and you're like, "Okay."
Yeah.
That doesn't necessarily make sense, but you know what? Okay. And so that's what I wanted to open up for and say, what do you think are first the best uses of this? And Malice mentions exactly one of the things I think is the best use of this, and that's crits and crit fails, where someone does a critical hit or something, or in like the now famous, how do you want to do this Matt Mercer moments where they just let them go hog wild, or you add some kind of dramatic impact or effect that's not within the rules. It's not something that technically should happen, but it's really cool.
Yeah.
Or it's really sucks if it's a crit fail and you're like, "Oh, you fall off the cliff."
I like bending them in those situations where a particular character might be going up against a situation that others might look at like there's no way that would be realistic, and allow them to roll for it despite that, or make some conditional elements towards, well, you really want to do this. It doesn't make sense given your height or how far you can jump, but yeah, maybe there's a higher DC rather than say no. Maybe it's a double roll, and the first roll kind of emphasizes how hard or easy the second roll is. Case in point, we have a halfling in my campaign who wanted to scale a wall up to a ledge. He's a halfling, so can't do a whole lot. Climbed a brick wall because I let him. Didn't make sense. I made him do a double roll. He jumped onto a table, scaled the wall like monk style, even though he's not a monk, and got up to a ledge to where the boss was. And it worked for him, and it was really cool for him. He enjoyed it. Not something realistically you expect a halfling to be able to do, though.
Yeah, but it was fun for him.
Yeah.
I think for me, one of the things I like is, well, first, before I go into that, I'll say this. I think this does come up a lot with certain rules in certain games, like jump in D&D, especially 5th ed, where they're like, you have this calculation of how far you can jump, and no one goes by it. I have not played a game yet where anyone actually goes by that math, and they're like, all right, you can. This says you can jump 10 feet, so you can jump 10 feet. We're all like, make a jump check.
Yeah, make an acrobatics check or an athletics,
no,
whatever.
You got to make a check for this. We're not. Though I will say, there are occasions, which we'll get into in a little bit, I think, where you can use this to kind of remove rolls as well. Where you're like, instead of adding rolls, you can be like, no, we're not going to roll for that. But one of the best uses, I think, for the rule of cool is towards the end of a fight. Literally the how do you want to do this type moment, but not just limited to that. Towards the end of a big fight or something, either for the killing blow or for other things, once now that the combat has moved to a climax, because if you let somebody do like a really cool thing and it's at a moment that doesn't matter, it's just, they're going to get an ale from the tavern. That's, oh, cool, I got to do this really cool thing while I got my beer. But if they're fighting a dragon and they're, half the party is down, or people are close to dying and stuff, and they get to do a really cool thing and they pull off something really cool, that's a lot more impactful. So I think picking your moment for when to do stuff like that, when to enact the rule of cool, is important. And similarly to that is when something is important to the character or the player. Like I mentioned the example for my last session with your wild magic. I decided to do that in large part because it was in kind of a dramatic moment that was a little bit important for your character. And so I was like, oh, it'll be funny if his wild magic kicks in right now while he's casting a spell. Who knows what's going to happen? Yeah. That's fantastic. And it didn't end up being anything, but it could have been crazy.
I could have turned into a pot.
You could have just turned into a plant. Or fireballed your entire group.
Yeah, or fireballed the entire group. No, I agree. And even not just moments for a player, but if something makes sense for a player's backstory. In my campaign, we have a shifter who has a just character only, as part of her backstory, grew up in the wilderness alone, and was a hunter. And there are no rules for like giving advantage for trying to smell things that you've smelled before or anything like that. But I go along with that because it makes sense for the character. I'll frequently give her advantage specifically on tracking via smell or things like that.
Yeah. And yeah, we're talking about tabletop in general, but we play a lot of D&D, so D&D comes up
we do
a lot.
A lot.
It's not the only thing we play, but it does come up quite a bit. The other thing I wanted to ask, and again, this is always for chat too, is do you think there are limits? Or, well, I know that there are. There definitely got to be some limits. But what do you think the limits are for the rule of cool? Like, what are some things that stand out as lines or areas of caution?
Anything that gives a permanent bonus to, like an unfair permanent bonus to one of your players and doesn't quite affect the rest of the group, that maybe steals another player's moment, or leads to the continuation of stealing players' moments via just that overpoweredness or lack of fair balance between classes and stuff.
Yeah. And that was one of the main ones I was going to touch on, is balance. Which I think is a little bit mixed with favoritism. If you do, which applies in a couple different ways. If you apply the rule of cool, you have to apply it to everybody. You can't, if you're always rule of cooling one person, it starts to look like favoritism, and to be fair, some classes lend themselves to it a little bit more sometimes in certain games. Like Monk in D&D can do a whole lot of really cool stuff. And I get annoyed. I get a little bit annoyed with CR campaign 2 sometimes when their monk is constantly like, I could do dope monk shit, and I'm like, that's not how that works. Like, sure, in your game it can, but it's a little bit annoying when it happens a lot. instead of just every now and then. That's like the request. Like, can I do that because I'm a cool monk? And it's like, I think it's cool when the storyteller or the DM is offering, like, you know what, you can do that because you're a cool monk. Not when the person starts asking it like they expect to be able to do things
Constantly,
because
yeah.
of their class or whatever, and you're like, it's not cool anymore. Um, but because it comes down to balance too. When someone starts being allowed to do a lot of things that don't really quite fit, you have to be careful a little bit. And okay, am I at this point just conferring them new powers and just giving them new things that they can do? Um, because when you rule a cool something, you do sometimes have to be a little careful not to set precedents. Um, and I don't think this is a huge problem because as the storyteller or the DM, it's kind of your prerogative to be able to go, this is going to apply. Okay, I rescind this. I don't want to do that anymore. Uh, but
Yeah.
it very much can tick people off, because hey, you let someone else do it.
I've specifically had times where I've allowed something, I think recently even, where I've said, given the situation, it kind of makes sense, but it's not always going to be the case that way. So I'll
Yeah,
allow it this moment, but I may not allow it in other moments
I'm
for
gonna hedge my
everyone, including the
bets.
person who just did it. If
uh,
if it makes sense, then sure, but
yeah,
be conservative with how much you do it.
yeah, and all players kind of do the fishing thing a little bit, where we're like, can I get advantage on that? You
Yeah, right.
know, and sometimes like, hey, can I assist and give them advantage with that? And like, well, you're not assisting now.
Yeah. There are some players who are the constant assist. I will assist with everything just because.
Because advantage, that's why. Uh, and I'm very guilty of that. Like, I will straight up go with people. Yeah, they're like, I'm gonna go do the thing. Oh, I'm gonna go help. But I usually try to actually help. Like, I'll
Yeah.
go with and be like, they're doing something. I'm like, I will pipe up and say something. be like, yes, I agree with them. That is terrible. Do they get advantage? Instead of doing it after the fact.
Yeah.
But another area besides just the rule of cool is character creation.
Mm,
Altering classes, races, abilities. Um, for example, this is not something we've ever really used, but swapping out a skill for a backstory reason. I would be more than happy in like D&D or other games that have skills to let somebody, if they had a good reason why they're like, I think I would have stealth instead of this skill. Sure. I mean, go for it. Usually, we find a way to fit that in with our backstories or something anyway, in like fifth ed. But I would let someone do it as long as they had a reason.
yeah. And really, I think, at least of the games we play or have played over the years, D&D is kind of one of the only ones that pigeons you or funnels you into your skills are
Yeah.
part of your class. You get into White Wolf systems and it's basically free reign.
Call of Cthulhu.
Yeah.
It kind of recommends sets of things that go for your profession, but it freely says, "Hey, change them. Pick what you want." Um, and it's one of the few games that really kind of limits that. And I think fifth edition does better than older editions in that it added backgrounds, which
Mm,
allow you to at least pick some different skills. But then, at least in our group, for the most part, most of us take backgrounds based on role play, not on which skills are available. There's a
right.
little mix of that too. Like, we're like, but I
Sure.
really want that
Small
skill,
amount.
but it's usually not the driving force.
Yeah. I think a lot of maybe the rule breaking in character creation might even be more creative than anything, unless again it's mechanical, more just sensibility.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, I've had, I've said no to it, but I've had a player, want to be like an undead or just a dead version of like an elf or something, wrapped in like mummy wrappings. No, and there are some elements where you can be cool with that. But then there are, in that case, some mechanical things you start have to thinking about as well that just really change the flow of the narrative.
And then there are some of those changes that, I mean, are okay, fine. I've been over the years trying my best to default to yes in response to things. It's hard sometimes. For instance, when a player is like, I want to play a Warforged Druid, a part of me is like, that's. Well, but then I was like, why not? You know what? No. You know what? I'm not going to stop that. Why not? It's okay. It's sure. Okay. Just, give me your backstory, whatever is going on, and I'll help you figure out why that's okay. And we did help figure out a reason why that's okay. And then he's like, and I want to have like, kind of like branches and stuff, like I'm part tree. And I'm like, okay, we will figure that out as well. And we did. We figured it out.
Yeah.
I was like, okay, here's what happened. I got it. I was able to rationalize it, figure it out. And you can't do that with everything. Not everything is going to make sense. And in some cases, there is something like, okay, you're going to look like a mummy and you're going to walk in the city and they're going to murder you. How are you going to play that as a character? That doesn't work.
Yeah.
Whereas be like, okay, you're a Warforged that's kind of tree-ish. It's Eberron, sure. No one cares. They're like, oh, weird Warforged. All right. Yeah, Warforged, I mean, they can be made out of wood and stone and metal. So that's why I was like, sure, why not? They technically can be made out of metal too. So then it's like, well, they're not supposed to wear metal or whatever. But I was like, forget it. I think the main issues with doing things like that in character creation do come into balance when you're doing anything that affects balance of the class. But that's the case with any kind of homebrew. If you're gonna homebrew anything, you run that risk. I mean, we had a spell in your game that you recently unhomebrewed.
I unhomebrewed it. Yeah, it's full brewed.
Because you had homebrew nerfed it, and I stopped using it altogether.
Yeah.
I was like, I didn't complain about it. I was just like, this is really not very useful in most situations now. I'm not going to really use it. And
the reason for homebrewing it, I feel, was at least a good one. It just didn't get used for, the way that I was trying to prevent it from being used to begin with. So it made no sense to keep it the way it was.
It was very broken if you used it in one very particular cheesy way, which happened in my last game, and it was very broken in that. But then I wasn't doing that, so it was like, it's fine as long as I don't do that. But yeah, I think favoritism can also be a bit of an issue here in some cases, because someone can come in the game but I think this is more about transparency, and what you're doing. Like, if you're allowing someone to swap a skill, I think that could potentially be problematic, because then other people are like, wait, I didn't know that was an option.
Yeah.
But if you're transparent about it and you're like, hey, look, he's got a background reason, I'm letting him swap out a skill in his class, then you run the risk that other people are going to want to do it, but it's only fair because you let someone else do it.
Yeah, that's something where even if you didn't talk about that as an option in like a session 0, the moment you've allowed another player to do it, you have to tell all the other players right then and there that, hey, if you guys want to, you can all choose one skill to do this or that, but you have to have a reason for it.
Yeah, I'm allowing it. I decided. Hey, Megan Beth, welcome. We are busy talking about breaking rules in tabletop games for better roleplay.
Yeah.
And our next topic in that is character development. Breaking this for new character development, which we've already kind of given some examples of. I'm doing very well, thank you. Specifically, learning new skills. We gave that example of, my character in your game, for instance, learned Dwarvish through usage. In another game, I had a character who was not proficient in performance or instruments, but had bought an instrument and was using it, kind of trying to long-term become proficient in it, though perhaps fittingly, every single skill check he made with it was absolute garbage. So I think at that point, it just became that he was absolutely awful with that instrument.
Makes
But we
sense.
really appreciate it.
Another character from my campaign, while you've learned Dwarven, made very early strides to learn how to sail a boat.
Yeah.
Prior to you guys getting a boat, and eventually became proficient with boats or sea vessels is the term.
He knew he wanted to be a ship captain, and he
Yeah,
made it happen.
he did.
Got to learn everything. Go and watch people swab the deck and man the rigging and yada, yada, yada.
Yeah. And it came with a whole element of like figuring out who his crew was and going through pseudo RP elements of picking from a list of people and paying them, and they all have strengths and weaknesses. So that was fun for him. He got to be like build your own boat or build your own crew situation.
Yeah, I think this is another area that's important to discuss whether or not there are limits to that. Like, what is there a limit to how much you want to allow someone to develop their character through role play as opposed to, and this will vary, I think, greatly by game, um, but how much you want to limit that as opposed to them having to expend experience and so on and so forth.
There should definitely be a lot of limits. I think there should be a few areas in which a player can work towards development, and it's typically self-chosen by the player, like what they kind of want to work on,
Mm-hmm.
because the natural progression of RPG is that development cycle as well, and you don't want to be just freeform off on your own, picking everything, learning everything. So maybe a few things that seem a little pertinent to either the character or what you're getting involved with in the story. You chose Dwarven because you guys are going into a lot of Dwarven related places, and it made sense. And there are some other aspects going on that I'll talk about here as well. But you pick a few things and you focus on those, as you have so much time in a day and you can only do so
Yeah.
much.
Yeah, I think that helps if you make it something that is lengthy. It's something that's time consuming. If they're going to do that, it takes a month or 2 months in game time. So if it's a very long campaign, someone may be able to do that multiple times if they really want to. But there's going to be a definite limit because of just how much time it takes to do something like that. Whereas I also think it becomes a little, depending on the game, it becomes a little bit hedgy when you're talking about things that are combat related.
Mm-hmm.
When it's, hey, can I learn how to speak Dwarvish? Or can my character learn how to play this instrument? Or can my character learn how to lie better, even? Um, I really want to be proficient in deception. Uh, I'm not even necessarily saying that's okay, but it could maybe be. But when you go into my character wants to gain a martial weapon proficiency, I'm not saying that's not okay, but some things kind of weigh into it. Like, okay, one, uh, are they already proficient with martial weapons? Because if they are, well, that's not an issue in 5th edition D&D, but
Yeah.
older editions, it would potentially be a thing. Because older editions had exotic weapons and everything, and so like if I wanted to be a proficient in an exotic weapon, but I'm already proficient with martial weapons, you would normally have to take a feat for that, but I'd consider it. I'd be like, okay, it's going to take you months to do it, but maybe why not? Um, you've already you're already good with good weapons. It's not like
Yeah.
I'm adding a whole class feature to you. Um, I also think keeping it, I like to keep it hyper specific if possible. Like, okay, you bought a flute because you want to be able to play the flute. Your character can gain proficiency with a flute, which is basically performance, but only
Right.
with the flute. But you are not proficient with perform because that would be a lot. That changes a whole lot.
Yeah.
And that's why I'm like, I would maybe consider something where someone can over time become proficient with an actual skill like deception or something. But that does get hedgy because there's like feats and stuff in D&D to do that.
Those are good times to, if you're talking with your player and or vice versa, your DM, if you know that that's something you want, start planning, at least for D&D, those 4th level, 8th level, 12th level ASI things, and just RP getting to those points. You don't have to really go too deep into trying to get it for free. At that point, you are kind of min-maxing, like, I really want these attribute points, but I also want this thing. And
yeah, and that's something like if you really want to be able to do, I would be much more willing to have someone do something like that if they told me when they created the character, like, I really want this character to become like an armored wizard where they have like heavy armor and they can still cast spells and all this stuff. I don't know if I'm going to be able to do it though, because I got to take all these feats and everything, yada 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 yada, and all this stuff. I'd be like, okay. And I don't know that I would necessarily allow them to, gain proficiency to do that. But, maybe if they went part way or something, I might give them a magic item like plate mail that doesn't require proficiency or something, and you can just wear it, I'd be like, well, I mean, maybe. I don't know. I'd have to consider it.
yeah,
But I'd be much more willing to consider putting that into the story or something. Hey, Sarah, if somebody, I knew that was a core part of the character. It wasn't something that someone just thought of later and then was like, it would be really cool if I had a higher AC.
everyone wants a higher AC.
Exactly, everybody.
Yeah.
It's constant.
Yeah.
I gotta get back to my notes here somewhere.
Yeah. And you can do very short-term character development as well that maybe even isn't mechanical, but is fun. Maybe it sets up something down the road, like it's building upon a thing that is already there a little bit, and you're just trying to set it up for later things. And it could also work in narratively that way as well, but still be character development related and not just narrative only. For instance, you have a crystal on your character in my campaign that I specifically did not give you details of its magical properties when you used identify, and that it just couldn't identify it. And typically there's no rule for that. Like if you use identify, you should know what it does. And even Matt Mercer does it in Critical Roles, like old magic stuff, but it led to you starting to mess around with it in a more personal RP flavor kind of way, both in downtime and even in games, and figuring out what exactly it does and how many things does it do. And you're still going through that process now, at least out of character time, a few months since we've been there, or since you've picked it up, but really like 3 weeks in game. And that's been fun.
I think that's something every D&D DM does. The old, I identify it. You can tell that it's transmutation, but you can't quite tell what it does. I don't know what it does. Yes. Which is DM speak for, shut up, I don't want you to know what it does.
Yeah, basically.
I want you, it does not fit into a predefined thing that's easy to describe what it does. It just does a thing, and I either want you to figure it out in a different manner, or it just does a thing. Leave me alone.
Yeah. Basically what it is, and that's bending the rules technically, because identify specifically says it. But it's fun to not know things sometimes and to work at it and figure it out.
The other thing I want to mention before I get to Malice's question here was this varies greatly depending on the game. We talk about D&D a lot, but in a lot of other games, this is kind of easily resolved by, for instance, you mentioned Vampire and World of Darkness games, where you can really level up any skill you want just by putting experience points into it. So that completely defeats it. You don't have to get things for free because you can go, I'm practicing my flute and I'm putting points in the thing I want
Yeah.
as I get experience to do it. And the DM, or in that case, the storyteller, may give you extra XP because of the things you did towards that goal. They might give you an extra experience point here and there. So that can really, you know, shift how that works in other games. Then you have Call of Cthulhu, where you literally level up skills by using them.
Yeah.
So, at that point, well.
And only by successfully using them.
Yeah. Now, that could be a little bit different, and I think you could still provide for downtime and development in some other ways, but it's not such an alien concept to just level up whatever you want in those games. Have you ever thought of a game of more front-loading feats on the characters that would just be getting it early, but just not front-loading feats on the characters that would just be getting it early? Oh, so starting with the feats and then they don't get any new feats.
Yeah.
Because I think it can be frustrating to want to be a non-human and have some feats. Yeah, and I think there are some people who will give a free feat at level 1.
That is a common homebrew, one of like the top. If you ever look at a list of the more practical common homebrew things, that's at the top there of everyone gets a free feat.
And I will say it's definitely desirable sometimes. Like in Brand's current D&D game, I specifically took a variant human. I was probably going to play a human anyway because we didn't have another human in the group, and I was like, okay, I feel a little bit weird that there's not like a single human in the group. Just my sense of logic. I'm like, I know the world is like, in this place we're playing, or this kingdom we're playing in is like
elven centric,
but we have no elves either. So I'm like, we need one.
Yeah.
And I really wanted the feat to start off with because I wanted a wizard with armor. I could have had mage armor. Really, the armor feat doesn't do much for me because I could just be using mage armor. But I was like, no, I want the armor. I'm going to take the feat just so I can get the stupid armor. It's part of my aesthetic. And so I took it. I've never thought about doing a game where you get all your feats up front. Nor have I really thought about necessarily like replacing the level 4 one. Like, I've thought about giving everyone like a free feat at level 1. I've never thought about moving the level 4 feat to level 1. It would be it's an interesting thought.
You then have to start looking at the rule of the 4th, 8th, and 12th level stuff and choosing your attributes versus the feats. And if you're preloading it, then that means you don't get to pick attributes either. It becomes a whole weird thing you have to start thinking about.
That is true. Because I would actually be more hesitant in 5th edition to allow someone to take an extra +2 to stats than I would be to allow them to take an extra feat. Even though 5th edition feats can be real good, those extra stat points at low level are kind of a thing. But really, I guess ultimately it just comes down to balance, like as the storyteller, balancing the encounters. You gave them all free feats or bonuses to stats, and so you're like, well, I'm going to bump up the CR of the encounters a little bit.
I did think of, it's totally not really on topic as far as full bending the rules. After I had gotten all your guys' characters info, of creating a short list of 4 to 5 feats that would be relevant to your class and or backstory, and have you roll and get a free random feat from that table as part of like a, you've had experience, you've lived long enough to know some things clearly, but and it could be completely irrelevant to where you're going in life, but just kind of walking into the situation with, I have knowledge in this one thing that may or may not be useful, but I have that knowledge.
I don't know how I would feel about that. I think it would be determined largely on what I got. Which is perhaps the one issue with it, because I feel like if other people got really cool feats and I rolled one that was like not useful to me at all, I'd be a little bitter about it.
They were free.
Yeah, but in D&D, in some games I might not be, but in D&D, which even for us, D&D has always got a definite, combative element to it, and the
Mm-hmm.
character balance and everything is definitely an issue. No one likes sucking in D&D.
No.
And so, yeah, if somebody else got like some cool feats and I was sitting there like, oh, yay, I got this. I never forget things. Cool.
Yeah. So and
And
so
they get
got
a plus.
Warcaster,
They
but I
get,
got Grappler.
and I'm a wizard. Great. I'd be a little bitter about that. I'd be like, oh, I'm kind of pissed off
Yeah.
about this.
I tried to like tame each list down, like to try to make it fair, and then I just like I'm not doing it.
This is too much work. Let's see. How we're doing for time. I want to push to our next and maybe last topic for this, and that is DM storytelling / narration. Using your hacks and rule bending as the DM for the story. And we've already mentioned some things like this, like identify, being like, no, identify doesn't work on this particular item because reasons. And there's a lot of occasions. DMs are the worst about this for themselves. Like we constantly bend and break rules to make the game work smoothly.
Yeah. Or just more fun, more interesting, especially for players who also DM and play and DM frequently. There's only so much you can throw at people where they don't know what you're up against, like in combat situations. So you and I have gotten to the point where we're largely homebrewing stuff in combat and coming up with our own rules, and there's balancing there. I have I didn't break a rule. I had a character, not my character, in my campaign who almost died because he went into a place by himself and didn't tell anybody. And on his, what would have normally been a medicine check to see if this assassin had, actually killed this person, I turned it into a luck check so that the desirable number was higher rather than lower. And he rolled a natural 20. And he immediately, I could hear it in his voice, like he just like, oh, I'm gonna die. But I told him, I didn't tell him actually what happened. I went into like a monologue of things, and he thought he was maybe dying from it, and it turns out he didn't. It was a luck check, just to see if he could get away in that moment.
Yeah, give him a slightly better chance.
Yeah.
And that was pretty fairly early in the game too. It was like this would not be an opportune time or nor dramatic really to kill someone off. This would just be kind of crappy. And no one was there to even witness it.
No.
Malin said, I used to play in a long-running game where materials were found throughout the world you just didn't know anything about. And eventually it would be like, well, what if you put these items together to make a magic item? So make unique magic items like that. I've always had a hard time with that, to be honest, finding a comfort level with bending rules to make the game smoother. Yeah, it can be hard. It is definitely an area to toe the line. There are some things to be careful about. For instance, one thing that I think is potentially a little bit controversial, which I am very guilty of. But do you have enemies do things that players cannot? Like use magic or spells that does not exist in the book, that the players cannot know or use, but somehow they have it.
I have one instance of that.
I do it. I mean, I don't do it like all the time, but you've got the big bad guy. They need to have some kind of cool powers or something sometimes that players don't have. They need to be able to do some cool portal or summon some eldritch horror or do some cool thing that your players like, well, I wish I could do that. That'd be cool. And you're like, yeah, I'm cheating a little bit.
I mean, there's already grounds for it in the books. So the monsters have special, unique traits and things. Who's to say someone hasn't found or made up their own spell? But yeah, I've done
Let's
that,
see.
but
Oh,
not in a
so that Mal
combative
says
way.
yes.
Yeah, I've done it, but it's been a very non-combative thing. It's a communication spell,
The one thing.
which
Go ahead.
which I designed specifically as a narrative tool to be able to give the party an amount of
I want
information
that
of
spell so
pertinence.
bad.
Yeah, without having to spend 25 words and 3 or 4 spells to do it at a cost. But
You gave your
yeah,
NPCs super sending, and we're just like sitting there so
yeah,
jealous. You just
super
need
sending,
to
but
have us walk
everyone
up
hears
and they
it.
use some kind of really big magical device to do it, and we're like, oh, that's why
Yeah,
we can't do it. Okay,
yeah.
cool. We don't have the thing.
Who's to
Um,
say I haven't done that yet?
I was gonna say Mouse was talking about the random magic items that create from his DM at this one long running game, and I was gonna throw in random paranoia speculation. What if your storyteller had no intention for those magic items and just gave you the random things to see what you would do with them, and then y'all started trying to merge them together, and then in spur of the moment was like, well, that's gonna turn into
Yeah,
Dagger of
that
Venom.
that happens all the time.
Because I feel like, you know what, that's something I would maybe do. I'd be sitting there like, I have all these weird pieces and stuff. What do they form? I want to have them do something. And then it'd be like, you know what? This is too hard. I'm just going to let the players start mashing them together. And when they do something that I think should make something, I'm going to make something. And
Yeah,
until then, nothing happens. Yeah, let's see. Chat scrolled up on me. Megan was saying virtually zero experience with playing. Never kind DMing. Oh, never mind DMing. Um, I'm glad you find it useful. Yeah, small town Inc. Yeah, absolutely. Please do follow us.
we have 17 episodes prior to this that you should catch up on. No.
Enjoy investing the hours. Um, I always get distracted by chat, and then I forget what I was going to say. That's
Combining
actually exactly how it
items.
worked, Malice. Okay, yeah, that's
Yeah,
what I was thinking. Because I do that on some things. I try not to do it too much, but there are some occasions where I'm like, you know what? And there are some occasions where I don't intend to do it, and I do it anyway. Case in point, I will reveal state secrets in my current game. I gave the players a custom-made magic item that is kind of like the alchemy jug, but
mm,
it does different things. Like you put something in there, it turns it into something else. And I have a whole list of things that get turned into things and what they get turned into. But the other
you weren't
day,
expecting that last one, were you?
they put something in there that I did not expect at all, and I was like, this should be a thing. Like this should turn into something. Huh. What should it turn into? And I ended up deciding that it would turn into this other like homebrewed potion that I made up. Um, but it was very much spur of the moment because I was like, oh god, this is a thing. They put something in there. I don't even remember what y'all put in there now.
We put in the drugs.
Oh yeah, that's right. I gave them homebrew drugs, and they decided let's put these drugs in the alchemy jug. And I was like,
Yeah, and
they were expensive drugs too, not like cheap drugs. They were like expensive
no,
drugs. So I was like, you know what? I have this potion that I made that's kind of like a stimulant.
that is also
So
worth more than the drugs.
it is. There are y'all had something else like that you discovered that you could kind of do, but it turns it into like a lesser quantity, so it kind of
Yeah,
balances out a little bit. And when it's like that, I was fine doing that because I'm like, how often are y'all going to find these drugs? Not very often. Could you go into a town
everywhere.
and buy a bunch of them? Maybe, but I can also easily cause problems for you if you try to do that.
Yeah,
If you suddenly try to be like, we're going to get rich by converting all these drugs into this other potion, I'd be like, I could
yeah. We
fix
started
that.
talking about that. We're like, and thus begins our adventure of entrepreneurship in Eberron. And
I kind of did. I kind of gave him like a half a potion of meth, I guess. Um, but yeah, that's kind of the big thing for me, narrative wise, is having spells and ritual magic do things that it's otherwise not really supposed to do.
Mhm.
normally.
Allowing players to like adjust spell damage types or come up with custom spells that are knockoffs of other spells and do slightly
Hmm.
different things, different saves, different damage.
Yeah, yeah. It's fun for character personalization too, to personalize spells for them. But I really mean like with the enemies and stuff with traps and weird things. For instance, like in my last game we did, had the at the final boss fight, the lever that you kept trying
That one.
to your character
Yeah.
kept trying to pull, and everyone else wouldn't let him pull the lever or unscrew the lever rather, because I
Oh
intentionally
yeah.
made it a thing that you had to do over a course of like 3 turns, so you had plenty of time to rethink it. Um, that I revealed afterwards would have toppled like half the city. Like it was this
Almost killed
giant
everybody.
magical structural thing that would have killed everybody if he had undone it. It had a warning sign on it that was like, maybe don't do this.
I can't read.
And your character's like, no, I'm gonna turn the thing. And they were fine. I think you got 2 cranks in on it, and the rest of
Yeah.
the party was like, no, leave it alone. Just leave it alone. We're leaving. And I was like, oh god, please pull it one more time. Just turn it one more time. Oh, he didn't do it. I'm kind of glad he didn't do it, but a part of me is so sad. I would have loved to have ended it by collapsing the city in on you. I had sound effects in Roll20 just in case you did it. I had a whole
Nice.
series of crashing sounds and stuff ready. But anyway, um, the other thing that I think this comes up for is on the kind of converse side, as the storyteller, resolving things without rolls. When you
Hmm.
decide, what, narratively speaking, let's just kind of story tell this out. And it happens in a couple of different ways, but like one, I think, as an easy example, is not using initiative in combat. Just deciding, what, this is going to be like a quick and dirty thing. It's not a hard fight.
Yeah. No one
What do
roll.
you do? What
What
do
are
you do?
all you guys
What do you
doing?
do?
Yeah. That's pretty common. And sometimes you even plan for that. Like, I want
Yeah.
an encounter, but I'm not gonna put the effort into, or nor should I put the effort into making a map for this. And it's not meant to be a full encounter. It's meant to just give them a moment of testing their wits and using up spells and
Yeah.
a one and done type of thing.
Well, it's like, I heavily considered that for our recent session. That moment I mentioned with your wild magic, that wasn't really challenging moment, but was a little bit dramatic. I considered doing it in that fashion. I considered just having it be a little spit of a fight where I just asked people to kind of narrate it, like, okay, what are you doing? Here's what this is doing. This is what they're happening. I'm not rolling their attacks. They either hit you or they don't. Yada yada yada.
Mm.
But I decided in that case that it would be more dramatic if I did go full turn by turn. If I did roll everything out and make you actually do it, because I didn't want it to be immediately apparent it was going to be an easy fight. I wanted y'all to go in there like, oh, we're going to have a fight. And then you go in, you're like, stab, thrust, hit. And then one of your characters does fireball and they all immediately drop. And you're just like, oh, wait, what?
No, I'm glad. I'm glad because I would have died the next turn. I'm sure.
Yeah, I got some
That
fortunate, some
4
amazingly
HP.
lucky rolls on you. Of course, as we've leveled up, you've taken some levels in Bard, so your hit points
Yeah, I've suffered a bit.
have suffered a bit for that.
Um, I actually did the same though in my last session. You guys ran into, or rather, you guys were being hunted initially by a few, two or more, strange like hybrid wolf things that part of the emphasis of that was to showcase like that element of hybridness, the weird turning of draconic properties on them. And I was about to, if it went that way, just have you guys start, fighting without any
Yeah.
need for initiative rolls. And then one of the other characters went in and tried to social, quote unquote, her way out of that and get them to
Intimidate.
back off, intimidate. Yeah, as more of a beast type character herself. So it worked out anyway. But
Yeah.
the
But
intent was, there was a narrative intent there.
yeah, that makes sense because there could be conflicts and stuff without the intention being a fight.
Yeah.
Not the intention to be doing that. Like with that scene I was just talking about in my game, the intention there for that whole scene wasn't really to have a challenging combat encounter. That was not the purpose. That was not what I was really going for. And I don't know if we got out of it what I was hoping we would get out of it. We will see in the fullness of time.
I did.
But challenging combat, it was not supposed to be. I got other things planned for that. I got full battle maps. I didn't even pull out a map. Y'all were like, "Are we rolling initiative?" I was like, "Yeah, roll initiative. I'll just keep tabs of it on this sticky note I've got right here. I don't have a map for this." But I also think, there are times when you can have full narrative resolution for a fight as well. And some people would do that a lot in even D&D, but especially other games. Like, for instance, Vampire. It is very common to try to avoid dice rolling as much as possible in Vampire or in a number of other White Wolf games. And it's very common to kind of narrate your way through a fight, or at least part of one. And for instance, the newest 5th edition even recommends that. Like, it gives you different options for how to resolve conflicts, like different methods. And then it's basically like, all right, if you're going full resolution with combat, turn by turn, if the combat takes more than 3 turns, consider wrapping it up. Consider just narrating what happens. Unless there's not a clear winner, unless there's not like someone who's clearly prevailing. But like if the party members, if the coterie is defeating their enemy and you're like 3 turns in, then maybe they should just run away. Or maybe you just say like, okay, you dive in. What do you want to do? Okay, you just dive in, you stab him and he dies or something. Because ain't nobody got time for that. And honestly, sometimes it's just more satisfying to have things wrap up and continue on with the story instead of spending an hour in one fight.
It's not necessarily bending rules, but it's certainly opting out of a set of mechanics and rules for hastening things. And we do that in D&D as well. If it looks like okay, you're down to two or three little small fry people, you're gonna win at this point. The question is, how much damage do you take? I don't really care at that point because it's not gonna be relevant or troublesome to you at the end of it all anyway. They run, or you guys finish them off. Bada bing, bada boom.
Yeah, and I know in D&D especially, some people will use minions for that. They will use these mobs that have been turned into 1 hit point minions.
And that
once. And I haven't actually used it, but I've considered it in several encounters. Like, do I want to throw minions in here so that I can add a bunch of little enemies for them to fight, but they don't take much time at all to kill? Actually, I take that back. I did use it for 1 fight, but y'all avoided the encounter.
Was that the kobolds?
All the kobolds, yeah, y'all avoided it, which was good because that was both one I was going to use minions for, but it was one you were intended to flee from. You were not intended to stay and try to fight through the whole thing. Yeah. So it worked out. Like I was like, okay, I figured they would fight a little bit, but the intention was for you to eventually run anyway. So
yeah,
message delivered.
I did it with the troglodytes in the cave.
Yeah.
All kind of funneling out the cave down towards you.
Let's see. Malice says, I did in my game where the party got pulled into a fully consuming illusion where the characters became powerful warriors fighting against an ancient dragon. And so it was mostly more narration that really mattered. That's cool. Yeah. That's a really good use for that. I could see that. Because then, they're not going to have all the stats and everything. It would be really cumbersome to have to give them character sheets and them suddenly figure out what their abilities are. Instead, just kind of allowing them to do whatever they want and you tell them how it works. That's cool.
Yeah.
All right, so we're about at time, or pretty much at time already. Is there anything else buzzing around in your brain?
No, I think those are some very broad categories that cover most of rule bending and or allowance or disallowance in tabletop.
Yeah. All right, well, in that case, a few quick announcements before we hop out for the night, everybody. I will be streaming Friday, I'm actually going to start streaming Star Wars Knights of the Old Republic.
Ooh,
I
snap.
tried this ages ago, but I spent like an hour and a half this week, and I got it to work. It was very difficult, but I got it to work on stream, so it should work.